We're in a series we're calling Meet the Bible. And what I'm doing each week is I'm giving an overview of a survey of the books of the Bible to see how they all fit together in God's big story of redemption. And it seemed like the logical place to start, if you're going to do this, is the book of Genesis. And we learned the very first time the book of Genesis really is the book of beginnings. Everything began. You can trace its roots back to the book of Genesis. And we just finished up the Pentateuch. Now, if you don't know what the Pentateuch is, it's because you weren't at our study. But Penta comes from two Greek words, Penta, which means five, Tuch, which means tool. It means the five useful tools. Literally, it's the five useful books. And these were books that were written by Moses. And this is really the beginning. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. Very, very heavy books, lots of information. As I've said, if you've ever tried to read through the Bible, the book Leviticus is probably where you checked out and thought, I'll read something else. Okay, I'll read A Tale of Two Cities or something like that. But we made our way through Leviticus. We made our way through Deuteronomy. Last week, we made our way through Numbers. And so once we got through all of those books, we're finally able to go to Joshua. And even though those books were heavy, Joshua is more of a story. It's a story of encouragement. It's a story that has to do with victory and conquest and hopes and dreams finally realized. Finally, they become a reality. So that's what we're going to be looking at today as we get into the book of Joshua. Let's just begin by looking at some introductory matters. First of all, let's think about the title. Obviously, the title is named after our hero of the book. His name is Joshua. And what you need to know about the book is in chapter 1, Joshua is commissioned. That's where God comes to Joshua and says, Moses is died. He's going to die. You're going to be the one who leads the people into the promised land. So he's commissioned in chapter 1 of Joshua. He dies in chapter 24 of Joshua. So when you think about the book, it's really a journal of Joshua's life. So that's what we're going to be looking at this weekend. Now you find the earliest mention or the earliest reference of Joshua in Exodus chapter 24, verse 12. Let me read it to you. The Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and stay here, and I will give you the tablets of stone with the law and commandments I have written for their invitation. Then Moses set out with Joshua. So there's our guy, his aide, and Moses went up on the mountain of God. And so think about this. In our earliest record of Joshua, he's kind of like Moses' servant, but I think he's probably more like an intern, like a trainee. And so there's a historic link between the two. I wanted you to see that. And then Exodus chapter 33, verse 11, it says this, the Lord would speak to Moses face to face as one speaks to a friend. By the way, I think that's one of the greatest verses in the Bible. Then Moses would return to the camp, but his young aide, Joshua, son of Nun, did not leave the tent. By the way, let me just say as a side note, there's a really, really good lesson right here. If you want to be a person of God, spend time with people of God. Let me say that again. If you want to be a person of God, spend time with people of God. Let me tell you something right now. Owning a Bible will not make you godly. Going to church will not make you godly. If you want to be a godly individual, find some people who are godly and spend time with them. Learn their ways, learn how it's done, learn their strategy for character development. In fact, just so you know, before culture came up with the idea of, I call them cemeteries, but they're seminaries. That's actually how young men and women were trained for ministry. If you wanted to go into ministry, you found someone who had a track record and you studied under them. You let them mentor you. Just one other thing. There's one more reference to Joshua that I want you to see. It's in Deuteronomy chapter 31. This is what it says in verse 14. The Lord said to Moses, now the day of your death is near. Call Joshua and present yourself at the tent of meeting where I will commission him. So Moses and Joshua came and presented themselves at the tent of meeting. The Lord gave this command to Joshua, son of Nun, be strong and courageous, for you will bring the Israelites into the land I promised them on oath, and I myself will be with you. Now, I want you to imagine how Joshua must have felt at this moment. He has been alongside Moses for all of these years. He's watched him. He's observed him. He's listened to him. He's learned from him. But not only that, being beside Moses, he's experienced all the blessings without any other responsibility. But all of a sudden, we find out that Moses is going to die. And Joshua says, Joshua, just so you know, you're going to be the individual that's going to lead my people into the land. So when you get to Joshua chapter 1, we literally pick up right where Deuteronomy left off. Moses dies. The people, they mourn for a period of 30 days. After 30 days, God comes to Joshua and says, that's enough mourning. It's over. It's time to move forward. It's time to finally take the land. And I am sure that the emotions that were swirling around in Joshua must have been incredible. But right now, I'm sure he's thinking about, like, Moses is gone. Who's my spiritual leader going to be now? I mean, who am I now going to turn to when times get tough? And so God comes alongside of Joshua and he lets him know, listen, you cannot live in Moses' shadow. Moses did his job. He fulfilled his purpose. Moses is gone. You're going to have to step up now and you're going to have to take the lead. In fact, I want you to see God's promise to Joshua in Joshua chapter 1, verse 3. He says this, I will give you every place you set your foot as I promised Moses. In other words, the same promise I made to Moses, I'm making to you. I am going to give you the land. It is already yours. All you have to do is go in and take it. And then he describes the land in Joshua chapter 1, verse 4. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon. By the way, when you go with me to Israel, and I know that you all will one day, when you go with me to Israel, when we go to the most northern part of Israel, we will stand at the border, and guess what we look into? Lebanon. It's still the border today. Your territory will extend from the desert to Lebanon, and from the great river, the Euphrates, all the Hittite country, to the Mediterranean Sea in the west. So all the way to where Tel Aviv is today. And I'm sure Joshua is nervous, so God reassures him in verse 5. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. A.W. Tozer has written a great book. It's entitled The Divine Conquest. The whole first chapter is about Joshua chapter 1. And this is what Tozer writes. He says, we cannot think rightly of God until we begin to think of him as always being there and there first. Joshua had to learn this lesson. He had been so long the servant of God's servant Moses and had with such assurance received God's word at his mouth that Moses and the God of Moses had become blended in his thinking, so blended that he could hardly separate the two thoughts. By association, they always appeared together in his mind. Now Moses is dead. And lest the young Joshua be struck down with despair, God spoke to assure him, as I was with Moses, so I will be with thee. Moses was dead, but the God of Moses still lived. Nothing had changed. Nothing had been lost. Nothing of God dies. I love this phrase. Nothing of God dies when a man of God dies. Now, I mention that because I think as a human tendency, we like to focus on other people. And sometimes we like to put them on a pedestal. And when that person lets us down, or even worse, they die, we kind of feel like there's this void in our life, that something of God is lost. I remember years ago when I was living in California and Billy Graham was put on the cover of magazine as Time's Man of the Year. And in the interview, great interview, one of the few great interviews Time magazine has ever done. But anyway, in the interview, they asked Billy Graham, who was responsible for millions of people giving their lives to Jesus Christ. And they said, who's going to step into your shoes when you're gone? And in Billy Graham's humble way, he said, God always has the next person waiting in the wings. See, that's what God wanted Joshua to learn. Moses did his thing. He filled his purpose. But I've been preparing you and you're waiting in the wings. So that's where we find Joshua. And so God says, Joshua, I just want you to know you can count on my presence. You see it in chapter 1, verse 5. Look what God says to Joshua. No one will be able to stand against you all the days of your life. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will never leave you nor forsake you. Now notice this. Be strong and courageous, because you will lead these people to inherit the land I swore to their ancestors to give them. Notice it again. Be strong and courageous. There's a theme here. We just saw that in the last chapter of Deuteronomy when God told Joshua, you're going to be the guy. What did he say? Be strong and courageous. If we were to read on down through Joshua chapter 1 to verse 18, guess what God says again to him? Be strong and courageous. And so just a matter of a few minutes, 4 times God says to Joshua, be strong and courageous. You know what that tells me about Joshua? He wasn't strong and courageous. But God's wanting him to, you can do, you're my guy, you can do this. So be strong and courageous. Then he says this, be careful to obey all the laws my servant Moses gave you. Do not turn from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Keep this book of the law always on your lips. Meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything written in it. Then you will be prosperous and successful. Now, that doesn't mean that they're going to be rich. It means that they're going to be right in the sweet spot of God's will. You ever done anything and you felt like, I'm exactly where God wants me to be? That's the sweet spot. Let me just tell you, when you're in the sweet spot of God's will, as you're going to see through the book of Joshua, you feel like you're invincible. There's a confidence that God gives you that just blows your mind, and you feel like you can just handle any challenge that comes your way. And so that's where Joshua is. And so Joshua, he steps up and he becomes the leader of the people. Now, what's the theme of the book? Very, very simple. Faith leads to victory. And what a theme that is for all of our lives. When we walk by faith, we are going to live and experience victorious lives. Faith leads to victory. In other words, God says, listen, Joshua, I've done my part. I've already given you the land. Now you have to do your part. By faith, you got to trust me on this one. You have to go in and you have to take and claim the land. A couple of things I want you to see as we go through this story. One is I want you to see the change in the attitude of the Hebrew people after spending 38 years wandering in the wilderness. Remember how they grumbled and mumbled and complained? They didn't like what God was doing. They didn't like what Moses was doing. They weren't happy with the food. They weren't happy with the water. They weren't happy with anything. But I want you to see the change in attitude. And I want you to see the amazing things that they're now able not only to accomplish because of their change of attitude, but because now, for the first time, you're going to see a unified group of people. And they're unified around the vision. By faith, we can do this. If we have faith, we can do this. So let me show you 4 signs of unity that come right out of the book. And I want to show you the result of that unity. But one of the things I want you to see is how applicable it is to where we are as a small group of people that God has assembled together. And what's possible if we realize that this is a journey of faith. Here's the first sign of unity. You'll notice that the Israelites rallied around their leader without fear. They just rallied around Joshua and they're like fearless. Now think about this. These people still haven't stepped foot into the promised land. In fact, they haven't been there for over 500 years. No Jew had been in the promised land, in the land of Canaan, what we now know today as Israel, since Jacob picked up his family and relocated to Egypt because of a famine. 500 years. And although they've been out of Egypt now for 40 years, they still haven't stepped foot back into the promised land. But now they're right back where they were 38 years earlier. They're right at Kadesh Barnea. They're looking over the Jordan River into the land. They know already, because of the report from the spies years earlier, that there's 4 fortified cities there. I'm sure they had heard it through the caravans and travelers that there were fortified cities there. And that's where they hesitated last time, and it was a disastrous. But this time, when they get to the very same place, when they get right to the river, right to the border, they're ready to go. And I want you to notice how they respond in chapter 1, verse 16, after Joshua kind of lays out the plan to go. Now remember, he's getting ready to try to lead 2 to 2.5 million people across the Jordan River into the promised land. Notice what it says in verse 16. They said, this is their response to Joshua after he laid out the plan. Whatever you have commanded us, we will do. Now, this is a whole different group of people, right? Imagine if your teenager would say that. Yeah, whatever you want, Mom, I'll do it, right? Whatever you have commanded us, we will do. That's cooperation. Wherever you send us, we will go. That's availability. Just as we fully obeyed Moses. Now, let's just be honest, that may be a stretch. I'm not sure we could say they fully obeyed Moses, but it kind of reminds me of the bumper sticker, the older I get, the better I was. So they're looking back, right? And they remember themselves better than they really were. But just as we fully obeyed Moses, so we will obey you. And I'm sure Joshua's thinking, I hope you do a little better than that. But my point is that's commitment. Only may the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Whoever rebels against your word and does not obey your word, whatever you may command them, we'll put them to death. Now that's loyalty. Only be strong and courageous. And so there's encouragement. So think about it. There's cooperation, there's availability, there's commitment, there's loyalty, and there's encouragement. I'm telling you, those are words that describe a unified body of people that are going to accomplish something. And it's easy to make those kinds of statements when there's nothing on the line. But this is where the plot thickens. Because up until now, it's been fun and games. Up until now, nobody's had to fight. Up until now, no one's had to go into a battle and take a life or maybe see a friend killed in battle. Up until now, it's been a cakewalk. In fact, did you know that when they actually crossed the Jordan to go into the promised land, that God parted the waters of the Jordan River, just like he did with the Red Sea, and they walked across on dry land? I mean, it's been a cakewalk. And maybe you're wondering, as they get into the city, the very first thing they come to is they have to deal with the city of Jericho. And you're thinking, what's the big deal about Jericho? Well, first of all, it was very, very strategic because of its location. It's right in the center of the promised land. And if the Israelis, if these Jews, if they can take Jericho, it's going to give them an incredible strategic advantage, military strategic advantage. But not only that, it's going to send a message throughout the land of Canaan that there's a new God in town. Something's going down. But there's one major obstacle in taking the city of Jericho. What is it? It's the wall, right? It's the wall that surrounded it. In fact, thanks to archaeologists, we now know that it wasn't just a single wall. It was actually, archaeologists have discovered, it was a double wall. The outer wall was about 6 feet thick, only about 10 feet high. Then there's about a 4-yard space. And then there's an inner wall. And the inner wall is 12 feet thick and is 30 feet high, about 3 stories. And that may not sound like a big deal to us, right? 30 feet, that doesn't seem like a big deal. That is a huge obstacle to people who aren't warriors. Understand, these people, they're not known for their ability on the battlefield. They have existed, if you go all the way back to Abraham and his kids that lived in Canaan originally, that family that grew to 70 before they relocated to Egypt, that was the nation of Israel. So in 500 years, this is a nation that has never been to war. This is a nation that has never been to battle. You know what they're really good at? They're really good at being slaves. And they were slaves for 430 years. They're really, really, really good at making bricks. They could make some bricks. Less straw, we'll just make bricks. We don't care. They're really, really good at walking. They have done a lot of walking over the last 40 years. Warriors, not so much, right? And that brings us to Joshua chapter 6, verse 1. Now the gates of Jericho were securely barred because of the Israelites. No one went out and no one came in. Then the Lord said to Joshua, see, I have delivered Jericho into your hands. They're probably thinking, it doesn't look like it, but yet I've delivered it into your hands along with its king and its fighting men. So God says, I don't care how fortified it looked and how like I can't do it, it looks, it's a done deal. And then you get to verse 3 and 5 and God gives the instructions for taking the city. And this is the part we're familiar with. God told Joshua, this is what you do. You march around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of ram's horns in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing the trumpets. When you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have the whole army give a loud shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse and the army will go up, everyone straight in. And the thing is, it's a wonderful plan because it is just so illogical. But you know what the challenge is? God gave these instructions to Joshua. Now Joshua's got to go back and tell his military leaders the plan. Can you imagine that scene? Can you imagine Joshua? Okay, like Joshua, what are we going to do? I mean, look, it's got 2 walls. What are we going to do? Okay, write this down. Tomorrow morning, we're going to get up and we're going to march around the city. Okay, what next? Nothing. That's it. And then we're going to do it Tuesday. In fact, we're going to do it 1 time a day for 6 days. And they're writing this down like, man, he's lost it, right? And now here's the big one. Here's the big one. On the 7th day, men, write this down. We're going to walk around 7 times. And the priests are going to play some music for us that day. They're going to blow the ram's horns. It's going to give us a little marching music because it's 7 times around. And then at the end of there's going to be a long blast. You'll know when it happens. And then we're going to shout. You ready? And the walls are going to fall down. Any questions? I mean, imagine these guys thinking this through. And the beautiful part of it is if you read it, he tells them this plan. There's no resistance to the plan. There's no reluctance to the plan. Why? They're unified. You don't read anywhere in this chapter about somebody going back to their tent and saying, Joshua, this is a stupid plan. I mean, where is Moses when we need him? This guy's an idiot. He's been out in the sun too long. No, they're like, okay, that's what we're going to do. Let's go put on our walking shoes. And they go put on their walking shoes. Again, let me point out, these are not the Israelis of the 21st century. One of my favorite T-shirts when I go to Israel is a picture of an Israeli fighter jet. And it says, don't worry, America, we have your back. I love that T-shirt, right? And one of the cool things, if you ever get to go we'll go to the top of Masada, which is around 6,000 feet off the desert floor where King Herod built a palace. It's a great place. It's a horrible story, but a great place we visit. And often the Israeli jets, the Air Force will fly maneuvers, and they will fly very low over Masada. You're already 5,000, 6,000, and their wings at you. Just sends chills up. That's not these Israelis, right? These are not fighting men. They're backpackers. They're walkers. Think about it. They walked through the Red Sea. They walked laps around the wilderness for 40 years. They walked across the Jordan River, and now they're going to walk around a city. It's almost like God said, they don't have a lot of strength, but they're good walkers. Let's just go with their strength. Let's build something around their strength, right? So they're going to walk around. By the way, I always think, and this is maybe my weird way of reading the Bible, but can you imagine the soldiers on the wall of Jericho watching this every day? Like, here they come again, Bill. Well, there they go. There they go, right? You guys would go back home, shower, get a pizza, sleep, get up the next day. 6 days, nothing happens. Finally, the seventh day, they follow directions to a T. 7 times they walk around the city. The trumpet's playing. There's a long blast of the trumpet. The people shout, and the walls fall down. But do you know what the moment of truth was? It was the seventh day. 7th time around, right after the long trumpet blast, just before they shouted. It is put up or shut up time. Either those walls are going to come down, or they're going to look like the biggest idiots in the world. And they did it just as God said, and the walls collapsed. And by the way, if you study the ruins of Jericho, the archaeologists have found where the walls fell in on themselves. It's just as God described it. But the amazing thing is you don't read a thing about anybody being surprised, which brings me to the second sign of unity. The Israelites accepted a new plan without resistance. This is something they had never heard of. They'd never been in battle before, but they just accepted it. They said, let's just trust God and let's just do it. And it kind of reminds me of what's going on with us. This is new. I've been to enough church conferences when I was younger. I've read enough how to build a church book. This is not how you do it. You got to have a good message. You got to have incredible music. You've got to have a welcoming facility. You got to have probably some lights these days and a couple of smoke machines. You got to have some video cameras and big screens. And then on top of that, you got to have a good nursery and kids ministry, or families aren't going to come. And you got to have a college ministry if you're going to reach college kids. And you got to do some stuff locally. You got to do some stuff globally. You got to be doing all these things if you're really, really going to be a church. In fact, somebody came last week and they're here the first time. They said, I went to this big church. And I left there and I went to this big church, and they're the 2 biggest churches in the area. And says, so I came here today and says, I'm kind of looking for something different without all the technology and the bells and whistles. I'm like, you have found it. Good gracious. We don't even have an overhead projector. And if you're not old enough, you don't even know what I'm talking about, right? But we don't even have an overhead projector. We just have us. But you know what I think back to when the church started in the New Testament? What did they have? They just had us. And so what is a church when you really think about it? It's a group of unified people who are sharing the good news of Jesus, making a difference in the world. I love what it says in Acts chapter 1. What did Jesus say? You're now going to be my witnesses, the witnesses of my gospel, the witness of my love. It's going to start right here in Jerusalem. Then it's going to be in Judea. Then it's going to be in Samaria. And then it's going to go to the ends of the earth. And this morning I got up early. You can always tell my last minute stuff because everything's handwriting is a scribbly mess. But I thought about, even as a small group of people, how God has been able to use us because we've just trusted him in sharing the love of Jesus Christ with the world. When you think about Jerusalem, think about it this way. That's our Bible study. That's who we are as a family. How do we show that to one another? And I thought last year of the people that we were able to give some financial assistance to. I thought of the great story just the other week. Someone sent me a message and said, someone going through a tough time physically. And I said, is there anything we can do for you? She said, I need somebody to go with me to the doctor on Thursday. That would be encouraging to get a CAT scan. And I called Marge, texted Marge. I said, Marge, would you do this? And Marge, without hesitation, she said, yes. And on Sunday when I saw her here, she said, anytime you need that. See, that's what the body does when it takes care of one another. We encourage one another. Think about this. We're a young group. We've already baptized 17 people who have come forward and said, I profess Jesus Christ as my personal Savior. That's a big deal. Some churches will go years and never have 17 people that come forward and say, I'm professing Jesus Christ as my Savior. But see, you don't realize the other impact you're making because you think about Judea outside the church family. I get emails, I get messages. For example, YouTube. I remember I think it was Helen came to me and said, we should get a camera. And I'm like, no, I didn't even want to be on YouTube, not even with a telephone camera. I'm like, no, let's just go. But I gave in, we got the camera. Every week we get texts, messages, emails from people saying, we live here, we live there, people all over the world. Thank you for doing this. And so you, because of your vision, you've made a difference in people. I was walking in Ray's one night, table 42. I could take you to it right now. There was a mom, a dad, and 3 kids. And I walked by and they said, we don't come to your study. We watch every week. We watch every week. I was in the bar one night. Shannon came in. Sometimes she'll come in on Thursday and we'll have a quick bite to eat before the restaurant gets crowded. And as we're walking by the bar, there's a couple there. I am confident because I've seen them here for a couple of years. They don't know Jesus from a lizard. I mean, I'm that confident, right? And as I walked by, she turned and looked at me and she said, I've been watching you on YouTube. And I'm like, what? And I said, how did you find me on YouTube? She said, we were at the Chef's Palate, some restaurant somewhere, right? And she said, we're sitting beside some people and they're talking about Mike Lee's sermons. And so I turned to them and said, I know Mike Lee. I see him at Ray's. And that family told her about, and she went home and she's been watching him and she's now starting to ask me questions. But see, that's now we're reaching that Judea, but not just that. There's charities that we partner with because it gives us a way to reach our Judea, people outside the walls of here. For example, the Helene Foundation. You probably don't even know this. The Helene Foundation is a foundation that was set up to minister to moms who have cancer, single moms who have cancer. And they can't do the basic things like get to the grocery store, tutor their children and help them with their homework, clean the house. And so the Helene Foundation raises money and they go in and they hire tutors for their kids if they need them. They help with transportation. They have someone come in and clean the house as the mom's going through chemo. But what a great way to then be able to share the message of Jesus Christ. That's just one. The Miracle League. We gave a very big donation to the Miracle League last year because of your generosity. What is the Miracle League? It's a charity that ministers to families with special needs children. And one of these days, I want to have a Saturday morning outing where we go to one of their games at like 10 o'clock on a Saturday. And if you see what they are providing for these families, you're going to weep. But here's the other thing. You say, well, how do you even pick these? Because we look for things where not only can we give money, that's the easy part, but can we get involved? Can we do something hands-on? And you could show up and be a buddy to one of these special needs kids and help them get to first base. They build baseball fields that kids can roll on a wheelchair and get to first base. Some kids will never experience stuff like this in their life. And to see the joy on their faces. Thanks to Christine, we just started our partnership with the seniors. Those elderly people living in apartments that can't even afford to exist. And you don't think much about it, but when you bring in that bag of paper towels and toilet paper and shampoo, and we put in a gift card that allows them to buy some maybe fresh meat and fresh produce, you're making a difference in their life. In fact, if you didn't go on the Be Renewed Facebook page and see some of the pictures of the people that we just ministered to because of this and some of the notes they wrote to us, I tell you what, you'll be excited the second week of September, because we won't be here the first week, when you bring that bag in, because you realize you're making a difference in people's life. So we're hitting our Judea. How about Samaria? What is Samaria? Samaria would be the people that live in our community, but they're not like us. They're different than us. Do you know who the Samaritans were? They were half-breeds. That's what they were called. They were called half-breeds. They were Jews who intermarried with people who weren't Jews, and they had children. They were considered Samaritans, half-breeds. They lived in the community, but they really weren't a part of the community. They didn't get to live like the rest of the community. So when you think about that, as I said, the elderly, a lot of us weren't even aware of these situations. Last year, we were able to help 2 homeless people get off the street and find shelter. I've been in touch with Chris Jones down at Ship of Zion down in Southeast Raleigh. Like, what could we do to partner with you? I was so proud. Everybody knows Jacques. I like to kid about him. Jacques and I are going to run for president, and he's going to be president. I'm just going to be vice president. But I was so honored the other day because he called me and he said, we have an elderly couple in Apex whose air conditioning went out. And he said, they can't afford it. And he was concerned about their health. Is there something that can be renewed? I said, yeah, we'll buy the air conditioning. We haven't even been able to get it resolved yet because they were gone. They moved somewhere because they didn't have air conditioning. But I was so thrilled that he reached out to us and thought, that's what we do. That's what we do. We want to impact people with the love of Jesus Christ. You know what that does? It opens up the door for us to share the message with Jesus Christ. And then you think about to the ends of the earth. Some of you weren't even around, just a few of you last year when we had a young lady who came in who's under 30, went to college, got 2 degrees, and then decided God wanted her to go to Uganda to work with children. By the way, give you an update. We gave her a large donation. She's now building a school on her own has raised the money and is building a school there. The parents said, what are you doing in Uganda? You got all this education. It's what God wanted her to do. But we partnered with her to do that. We also partnered with a young man who's working in Nicaragua with children. Of course, we raised the thousands of dollars last year to drill the well in the village in the Central African Republic. That's the poorest country on the planet. But now it's going to the ends of the earth. At the end of the day, my whole point is this. We're being the church. We're being the church. And I honestly don't know what to expect over the next year or two. I don't know where God's going to take us, but because God has blessed us, I'm just naive enough to think that he's just going to continue to bless us. And we're just going to continue to move forward with this absolute confidence that God is in control and he has put us together as a unified group of people to make a difference on planet Earth with the gospel of Jesus Christ. So I go back to Joshua. He'd never seen this strategy before, just like we've never seen this strategy before. But you know what God said? He said, let's do it. And they did it. And I'm simple enough to believe that the same kind of thing can happen with us. And I think that's the exciting part of being a unified ministry on the move. Now, when you come to chapter 8, let me speed this up a little bit. The people have arrived at the city of Ai. They're a little gun shy because God told them how to take Ai, and they didn't do it God's way. They got their butt kicked. Okay, now they're going back for a second time. It's kind of like a rematch. And they're just like, I think we'll go with God on this. I think we'll do it his way. But the city of Ai is going to employ a different strategy, a new strategy, going to be altogether different than Jericho. You would think, well, God, why don't you just let them march around Ai like they did? No, God's got a whole different plan. So here's the third sign of unity. The Israelites worked as a team to accomplish the objectives without jealousy or competition. And I say that because Joshua 8 is an ambush plan. And this is the plan for taking the city of Ai. Joshua takes 30,000 of his best fighting men and he tells them, go hide out behind the city. And Joshua says, I'm going to take the rest of the troops and we're going to attack Ai, full frontal attack. We're going to attack. And when they begin to fight back, I'm going to yell retreat. And we're all going to turn around and run. When we turn around and run, they're going to open up the gates of the city and they're going to come chase us because they're going to think we're cowards and they want to wipe us out. And when they come out of the city to chase us, you guys that are hiding out in back, you 30,000, you come around, you take the city, then we'll have them trapped in the middle and we will wipe them out. Great plan. But what you have to remember is this. Some of the people would get to be with Joshua, the man, the leader. Some of the people would be in the forefront. Some of the people would be in the background. For some, nobody would even know they were involved, while others would get all the spotlight and glory. But here's the thing. If you read chapter 8, it didn't bother them. In fact, you don't find anybody in chapter 8 saying, I never get to be in Joshua's group. I never get to be in the inner circle, And why can't I ambush? I'm really good at ambushing. I come from a long line of sneaky people. This is right down my wheelhouse, right? Why can't, but none of this like that you hear in most churches, none of that's going on here. Ronald Reagan used to have a sign on his desk, and I saw it one time, and I got it myself. I put it on my own desk. It's in a box somewhere. If I ever have an office again, I'll put it on my desk. But this is what the sign says. There is no limit to what a man can do or where he can go if he doesn't mind who gets the credit. How about that? You see, the victory at Ai was possible because everybody was willing to do their thing, play their role. It's just a part of unity. Yeah, that's what you need. I'll do it. When you get to chapter 10, you see one more sign of unity. These guys are tired. They're exhausted. They've had to battle at Jericho. They've had to battle at Ai. The end is in sight. They got one more battle, and it is a big battle. The 5 kings of the Amorites, they get together and think the only way we can stop this Jewish juggernaut is if we combine our armies, if we combine our forces. So they amassed this huge army, much bigger than the army of Israel. And so it says in chapter 10, verse 8, the Lord said to Joshua, do not be afraid of them. I have given them into your hand. Not one of them will be able to withstand you. Now get this, after an all-night march from Gilgal, Joshua took them by surprise. The Lord threw them into confusion before Israel. So Joshua and the Israelites defeated them completely at Gibeon. Israel pursued them along the road. I love the details of the Bible. Along the road going up to Beth Horon, cut them down all the way to Azekah and Makkedah. And so Israel just keeps up the pursuit of these guys. Verse 11, as they fled before Israel on the road down to Beth Horon to Azekah, the Lord hurled, look at it. He hurled large hailstones down on them, and more of them died from the hail than were killed by the swords of the Israelites. Now what's happened? Again, God knew they were tired. He knew they were weary. He knew they were fatigued. And he knew what they could handle, and he knew what they couldn't handle. And so he comes to their rescue. And these Hebrew soldiers, they get to sit back and watch is God just hurls down hailstones and finishes off the enemy. Here's the fourth sign of unity. As the Israelites' trust in God grew and their unity increased, they felt invincible. They felt invincible. In fact, I want you to see how Joshua's faith has grown. Remember how God had to encourage him, be strong and courageous, be strong and courageous. I want you to see how his faith has grown. On the day the Lord gave the Amorites to Israel, Joshua said to the Lord in the presence of Israel, sun, stand still over Gibeon, and you, moon, over the valley of Ajalon. So the sun stood still and the moon stopped till the nation avenged itself on its enemy, as written in the book of Jashar. What's the book of Jashar, by the way? It's one of those books that was written that was never canonized. It didn't make it into scripture. There's a reference to it in 2 Samuel 1:18. There's another reference in, I think, 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 8, but that's what that's a reference to. Never made it into scripture. And then it says this, the sun stopped in the middle of the sky and delayed going down about a full day, so that they could wipe them up. This is what I've learned over the years. I've learned that when God comes to your assistance at critical times, you feel invincible. And you just trust him with more boldness. I remember when Mr. Martin gave us the property to build the Raleigh campus, and it was not conducive to what we wanted to do, especially building the school and all. And they said it wasn't big enough. We didn't have enough parking, all of those things. So the city of Raleigh just voted us down 12-0. You can't do it. You can't develop it. So I went back to the congregation. I said, I don't know what else to do, tell you to pray. I'm going to go back and visit them again in a few weeks, and maybe they'll change their minds. And so I was going back, and I was walking in that day, downtown Raleigh. There was a guy that went to our church, was a traffic engineer with the city. And he just walked out. He said, you got this. And I thought he meant you're going to do a fine job, right? But what I didn't realize was I got up there, and the guy, whoever's leading the city council, said, Mr. Lee, before Mr. Lee speaks, do we want to take another vote? Not that great. And they took a vote, and they approved us 12-0 without ever having another conversation or anything. And nothing changed. In fact, they gave us the building when I think the average parking spot, we would have had to have 12 people come in each car. It'd be like a circus car. They approved it with that ratio. And that's why we ended up having to park off site from day one, but they approved it. And it just reminded me, I'm telling you, when you do something like that, when you pray bold prayers and you trust God and you move forward and God removes the barriers, you just feel like invincible. With God in charge, you can do anything. How do we avoid the things that sow disharmony so we don't lose this unity, all right? So we can experience the power of unity. Let me just give you a few practical things to think about. As we grow, let's work hard at continuing to try to understand one another. Do you know something I've learned about myself, especially these last 2 years? I tend to judge people by their actions, but I want them to judge me based on my intentions. Aren't we all like that? Like, you did that, your actions speak louder than words. But when I do something wrong, I'm like, oh, you know my heart. You know I wouldn't mean that, or I wouldn't do that intentionally, right? Don't we? I want to judge people on their actions, but I want to be able people to judge me on my intentions. I would just say one of the things that can keep us from being offended at each other is making sure that we're not jumping to conclusions and just assuming the worst about people. Let's try to remember that things like stress, that things like life experiences, that things like maturity level affect all of us, how we react to different situations, how we act and how we react. So when we find ourselves in those situations where someone's hurt our feelings, if we could just pause long enough to try to understand where they're coming from, you see, I think it would give us a different perspective, and it would probably help us give them the benefit of the doubt. And that's what will help us keep from jumping to conclusions and putting up barriers between us, and it will keep the unity. That's true in all of our relationships. Just give them the benefit of the doubt. Here's the second one. Let's be more intentional about taking the high road and forgiving. If someone offends you, most times you don't even have to deal with it. You just have to forgive them. But how often do we say we forgive? Because what the Bible says we have to do. Because if we don't, God's going to turn us over to the torturers. I forgave. But then what do we do in our mind every night we're laying in bed? Thinking about if we ever get to have that conversation with that person, what you're going to say. If you're having those imaginary conversations, you hadn't forgiven. I was having lunch with a guy one day, and I'm telling you, he had been hurt by someone at a level most of us will never experience humanly. So when we finished talking for a couple of hours, I said, how are you dealing with this? He said, I've forgiven him. I said, well, did you have a conversation? No. I just forgave him. I said, how do you know you really forgave him? And I'll never forget his answers. I thought it was the best explanation I'd ever heard in my life. He said, thought for a second, he said, I don't even have a plan for revenge. I don't even think about it. When you get there, you know you've truly forgiven someone. I don't wish harm on them. I don't wish revenge on them. I don't wish any of that. How can you even do that? How is that even possible? Colossians 3:13, forgive us, the Lord forgave you. If we could just remember what we've been forgiven from, right? Nothing more important for maintaining unity than just forgiving, just taking the high road. Just when you walk out of here, if somebody came across wrong and you thought I was a little cold to me, you just let it go. Just let it go. Paul, 1 Corinthians 13, don't take into account a wrong suffered. It's an accountant's term. You guys can appreciate this. It means don't keep a ledger. Do not keep a ledger in your mind of offenses. Don't even let them get there. Take the high road. Say, I'm having a bad day. I always tell people 20%. If you wait on me, I'm going to give you 20%. I don't care how lousy you are. And I'm like, well, maybe it's a single mom got a sick kid at home today, or maybe they got a migraine right now. I know what that's like, or maybe this, or maybe that. Maybe they're just a horrible server. But I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Right? And here's the last one. Let's start giving. When you feel used, and there will be times you'll feel used, when you feel taken advantage of, and there will be times you will feel taken advantage of as we grow, give people your prayers. What did Jesus say in Luke chapter 6, verse 27? He says, pray for those who mistreat you. I will tell you this, it's almost impossible to pray for someone and at the same time remain hostile toward them. It's almost impossible. You can't do it. So give them acts of kindness. Go slowly. You don't want to freak them out, but do something nice for them in return. Give them a card. Give them a text. Hey, man, you didn't seem yourself today. I love you. Anything I can do to pray for you? And you might find out, oh, this is what's really going on. Can you imagine the example we could be, even as a small group, to the rest of the world if we worked together with that kind of unity? I mean, what did Jesus say in John 13:35? It says, people will know you're my disciples if you fight, and if you compare, and if you compete with one another. No. He said, they'll know my disciples by how you love one another, by that sense of unity. You know why most people don't walk into the doors of church? They're like, I got more unity at the country club than those people who are supposed to be Christians have in their own church. So what we need is unity. And when it works the way God designed it, it's an amazing thing to watch. Next week, I'm just going to give you a heads up. I'm talking about the book of Judges, and this is my working title. Is America too young to die? Because the parallel we're going to see in the book of Judges, alongside of what's going on in our great country, it's sobering. In fact, I wrote this down in my notes. If your church is culturally woke, then you're going to end up spiritually broke. There you go. I mean, so we're going to talk about, we're going to see 7 cycles of misery that the Jews put themselves through and why. And again, the parallels that what's going on in our country is going to be eye-opening.